Life in Jerusalem. How people lived without toilets or showers 2,000 years ago. Imagine waking up before dawn, not to the sound of an alarm, but to the braying of a donkey tethered outside your door. The air smells of dried earth, animal dung, and the faint sweetness of bread baking somewhere down the narrow lane. There is no running water. There is no bathroom down the hall. There is no shower, no soap dispenser, no porcelain basin. And yet, in this city perched on the rocky hills of ancient Judea, hundreds of thousands of people lived, generation after generation, building families, conducting trade, worshipping their God, and surviving under a blazing Middle Eastern sun. How did they do it? How did they manage what we today consider the most basic human needs without any of the modern conveniences we take completely for granted? This is the story of what daily life truly looked like in ancient Jerusalem, a city sacred to millions, a city of stone and spirit, and a city where survival itself was an act of extraordinary resilience. Life in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago was nothing like you imagine. And by the end of this documentary, everything you thought you knew about the ancient world will be turned upside down. Jerusalem in the first century was not the sprawling modern metropolis we know today. It was a walled settlement perched on rocky hills, surrounded by the Judean desert to the east and terraced olive groves to the west. Most people lived in small villages, while cities like Jerusalem, Samaria, and Hebron were centers of administration and trade. The city itself was dense, chaotic, and alive with the rhythm of human activity. Narrow limestone streets wound between buildings stacked close together, their flat rooftops serving as extra living space where families slept on hot summer nights. Most houses had outdoor steps leading to a flat roof, which was like another room of the house, especially in hot weather. The Temple Mount dominated the skyline, its massive stone walls gleaming white and gold, visible from every corner of the city. Around it, neighborhoods clustered like cells in a hive, each with its own character. The upper city housed the wealthy priestly families in grand mansions with mosaic floors and plastered walls. The lower city, closer to the valley, was home to craftsmen, laborers, tanners and potters, people who lived in modest single-room dwellings, often shared with extended family and sometimes even livestock. Houses were made of mud brick with a stone foundation and perhaps a second story of wood, with living space consisting of 3 or 4 rooms, often with sleeping space on the roof. Water was the most precious resource in ancient Jerusalem, more valuable than silver in many ways. The city sat far from any major river, and rainfall was seasonal and unpredictable. To survive, the inhabitants developed an extraordinary system of water management that would impress modern engineers. The Gihon Spring was the main source of fresh water in Jerusalem, rising in a cave near the Kidron Valley. This spring had been the original reason Jerusalem was settled in the first place, thousands of years before the period we are exploring. But a spring alone could not sustain a growing city. So beneath the streets, a vast network of cisterns was carved into the bedrock over centuries. Every home, no matter how humble, had access to at least one cistern, a bell-shaped cavity cut into the limestone that collected rainwater channeled from rooftops and courtyards through plastered channels. Families guarded their water jealously, rationing it carefully through the long, dry summer months when no rain fell for weeks on end. And then came one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the ancient world. King Hezekiah, fearful that the Assyrians would lay siege to the city, blocked the spring's water outside the city and diverted it through a channel into the pool of Siloam. The tunnel was 533 meters long and was dug using pickaxes, with 2 teams working simultaneously from both ends until they met in the middle. Think about that. Over 2,700 years ago, engineers calculated the exact gradient and trajectory needed so that 2 teams of workers chipping through solid rock in total darkness would meet at precisely the same point underground. The gradient of the tunnel is 0 to 6 degrees, with the exit elevation just 30 centimeters lower than the starting elevation. This ensured water flowed gently from the Gihon spring to the pool of Siloam inside the city walls, keeping the supply safe from besieging armies. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Every week we bring you stories from the ancient world that no school ever taught you, the kind of history that changes the way you see everything around you today. Hit subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. The morning routine of an ordinary family in ancient Jerusalem would seem foreign to us, and yet, in its own way, it carried a quiet dignity. Let us call her Miriam, a potter's wife living in the lower city near the Tirapoion Valley. She would rise before the sun touched the rooftops. Her house was a single room with thick limestone walls, a beaten earth floor covered with woven reed mats, and a low wooden table where the family ate. A small oil lamp made of earthenware and fueled by olive oil flickered in a niche in the wall, casting dancing shadows. The first task of every morning was water. Miriam would take a clay jar, smooth and worn from years of use, and descend the narrow stone steps to the family cistern, located beneath the courtyard she shared with 2 neighboring families. She would lower a rope and bucket into the dark cavity, draw up just enough water for the morning, and carry it back up on her shoulder, as women had done for centuries before her. That water had to serve many purposes: drinking, cooking, washing hands, and cleaning. There was no room for waste. Breakfast was simple. Everyday meals included bread, vegetables, fish, cheese, and fruit. The bread was made from barley or wheat and was often unleavened. Miriam would grind barley into flour using a stone saddle quern, a flat stone with a rounded grinding stone rolled back and forth across it. This was back-breaking work, and it was done daily because flour spoiled quickly in the heat. She would mix the flour with water, a little salt if the family could afford it, and bake the flat bread on a clay oven, a tanner built into the courtyard floor. The oven was fueled with dried animal dung and straw, which burned hot and fast. The discovery of many ancient olive presses in various locations indicates that olive oil production was highly developed in ancient Israel. Olive oil was used for everything, from cooking to fuel for lamps to moisturizing cracked skin. Alongside the bread, the family might eat a paste of crushed lentils, a handful of dried figs, or some olives. Meat itself was a rare luxury, so much so that people were sometimes prepared to eat meat found on the ground because it was too valuable to be thrown out. For most families, meat was reserved for religious festivals and special celebrations. Now here is the question everyone wants answered. Without showers, without plumbing, without even the concept of a faucet, how did people keep themselves clean? The answer is both simpler and more complex than you might expect. Socially, it was very human that people wanted to mask unpleasant odors, and thanks to written sources we know that perfume, incense, and bundles of aromatic spices were commonly used in all aspects of life. But in Jerusalem, hygiene was not just a social preference. It was a religious commandment, deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. The Torah prescribed specific cleansing rituals for dozens of situations, from touching a dead animal to recovering from illness to preparing for worship at the temple. This meant that bathing, far from being neglected, was actually practiced with a regularity and seriousness that might surprise modern observers. The key instrument of this practice was the mikveh, a ritual immersion pool found throughout the city. More than 150 mikvahs from this period have been found in Jerusalem, and more than 300 in total throughout the land of Israel. These were pools carved directly into the bedrock, with steps leading down into the water. They had to meet strict requirements. The water could not be drawn by human hands from a vessel. It had to flow naturally into the pool, living water, as the ancient texts described it. From the Hasmonean period, the typical purification bath was a facility built or hewn into the rock, to which rainwater was directed through canals or gutters, without human contact, so that the water in the mikveh was in the hands of heaven. Pilgrims coming to worship at the temple would immerse themselves in these pools before ascending the great staircase to the Temple Mount. Archaeologists uncovered a mikveh dating from the late Second Temple period, hewn into the bedrock outside one of the main entrances to the temple itself. And now, the other question nobody wants to ask, but everyone is thinking: what about toilets? Where did people go? The truth is uncomfortable, in every sense of the word. For the vast majority of the population, there simply were no toilets. People used chamber pots inside the home or relieved themselves in designated areas outside the city walls. Deuteronomy 23:12 prescribed that there be a designated area outside the camp, and that one should dig a hole and cover the excrement. Inside the city, the situation was more complicated. Instead of water, ash or sand was often used to cover waste, helping to control odor and promote decomposition. However, for the wealthy elite, things were different. Archaeologists have discovered actual stone toilet seats in the homes of Jerusalem's richest residents. These stone blocks had a curved surface for sitting, a large central hole for defecating, and a smaller hole possibly for urination, and were situated above a cesspit. Having a toilet was indeed an indicator of wealth in Jerusalem too, 700 years ago. But even wealth was no protection against disease. Analysis of ancient faeces from 2 Jerusalem latrines uncovered traces of the parasite Giardia duodenalis, a common cause of debilitating diarrhea, representing the oldest example of this parasite infecting humans anywhere on the planet. Ancient cities like Jerusalem, which did not have sewage networks or adequate hygiene, were ideal places for such illness to spread. Now pause for a moment and think about this. Could you live even 1 week without a shower or a toilet? Drop a comment below and tell us honestly, how long do you think you would last in ancient Jerusalem? Let us walk through the streets of ancient Jerusalem as they truly were. Forget the romantic images from paintings and movies. The reality was far grittier. The narrow lanes of the lower city were unpaved in many sections, turning to mud in the rainy season and baking into choking dust in the summer. Animal waste from donkeys, goats, and sheep mixed with household refuse that was sometimes tossed directly from doorways. The smell was something a modern person would find almost unbearable. Tanners who soaked animal hides in vats of urine to soften the leather operated their workshops near the edges of the city, but the wind carried their particular stench deep into the residential quarters. Dyers, who used plant extracts and mineral compounds to color fabrics, added their own chemical sharpness to the air. And butchers, slaughtering animals in open-air stalls near the markets, left behind blood and offal that attracted swarms of flies. This was the everyday sensory reality of ancient Jerusalem. And the people who lived here did not complain, because they knew nothing else. This was simply what life smelled like. Keeping clothing clean was another enormous challenge. Men wore a kethaneth, a simple tunic made of wool or linen, tied with a belt. Over the tunic, they sometimes wore a mantle, especially during colder seasons. Sandals made from leather were common. Women wore similar tunics, often longer, with a head covering for modesty. These garments were washed by hand, beaten against rocks near water sources, and dried in the sun. Soap, as we know it, did not exist. Instead, people used natron, a naturally occurring mineral salt found in dry lake beds, or lye made from the ashes of certain plants mixed with olive oil. This produced a crude but effective cleaning agent. Hair was oiled with olive oil or perfumed oils to keep it manageable and to mask odors. Teeth were cleaned with twigs from aromatic trees, frayed at the end to create a rough brush. Personal grooming was not vanity, it was survival. Disease was the silent companion of every person in ancient Jerusalem. Without understanding of germs or bacteria, People had no way to protect themselves from the contaminated water, the spoiled food, or the infections that spread through close quarters. Intestinal disease may have been the result of either poor sanitary conditions, the use of human feces to fertilize field crops, or the consumption of improperly cooked meat. In the absence of medicine, recovery was difficult to impossible, and those infected could suffer from the parasites for the rest of their lives. Children were especially vulnerable. Infant mortality was devastating, with some estimates suggesting that nearly half of all children born in the ancient world did not survive past the age of 5. A mother in ancient Jerusalem might give birth to 6 or 7 children and watch 3 or 4 of them die before they could walk. Ancient medical texts from Mesopotamia during the 1st and 2nd millennium BCE describe diarrhea affecting populations of the Near and Middle East. One ancient Mesopotamian text reads about someone who eats bread and drinks beer and subsequently suffers from cramps and flowing bowels. Some texts even included recommended incantations to increase the chances of recovery, because in a world without antibiotics, prayer was often the only medicine available. And yet, despite all of this, life in ancient Jerusalem was not miserable. It is a mistake to project modern standards of comfort onto a world that operated by entirely different rules. The people of ancient Jerusalem found meaning, joy, and beauty in their daily lives. Families were close. Households often included extended family members, including grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Women gathered at the cisterns and the public pools, not just to collect water, but to share news, exchange advice, and strengthen the bonds that held the community together. Men debated in the marketplaces, argued about scripture, and told stories that had been passed down through generations. Their favorite pastime was probably storytelling, sharing the many stories about the history of their people and how God had taken care of them from the beginning. The Sabbath brought the entire city to a halt. Work stopped. Commerce ceased. Families gathered for meals that, while simple, were prepared with special care. Bread was baked fresh. Wine was poured, or at least water mixed with a little wine to kill the bacteria, though they did not know that was the reason it worked. Since clean water was hard to come by, people would sometimes mix water and wine together, as the natural antiseptic properties of the wine would kill some of the bacteria, making it safer to drink. In a world without entertainment, without screens, without distractions, the Sabbath table was the center of the universe for every Jewish family. And in that moment, in the flickering light of an oil lamp, surrounded by loved ones, the hardships of the week fell away. If this story is touching something deep inside you, if you feel a connection to these people who lived so long ago, type this phrase in the comments right now: "We are still the same." Because despite everything that has changed in 2,000 years, the human heart has not changed at all. At the center of everything in ancient Jerusalem stood the temple. It was not just a building, it was the beating heart of an entire civilization. King Herod built the largest religious compound in the world. The Temple Mount covered an area equivalent to several modern football fields, surrounded by massive retaining walls made of stones so large that even today engineers marvel at how they were placed. Pilgrims came from across the known world 3 times a year for the great festivals of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. During these festivals, the population of Jerusalem swelled enormously. Every household was expected to provide hospitality to strangers. The public mikvaot near the Temple Mount were in constant use as thousands immersed themselves before ascending to worship. During the Herodian period, the area around the temple was home to the city's wealthiest residents, and multiple ritual baths have been unearthed in striking proximity to the Temple Mount. The priests performed elaborate ceremonies involving animal sacrifice, incense, and prayer. The smoke from the altar mingled with the scent of frankincense and rose above the city like a column of cloud. For the ordinary person standing in the outer court, this was the closest they would ever come to the divine presence. And in that moment, the squalor of the streets, the stench of the tanneries, the ache of disease, all of it dissolved into something transcendent. But this world would not last. In the year 70 of the Common Era, the Roman legions, under the command of Titus, besieged Jerusalem. The city that had endured for centuries, that had survived the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Greeks, was finally overwhelmed. The temple was set ablaze, the walls were torn down, the population was massacred or enslaved. Following the First Jewish-Roman War in 70 CE, the Pool of Siloam was destroyed, and over the years, rain-washed soil covered it completely until it was forgotten. The cisterns ran dry, the mikvot crumbled into rubble, the streets that had echoed with the sound of children playing and merchants calling and priests chanting fell silent, and the world forgot what life had been like here. For nearly 2,000 years, the daily realities of ancient Jerusalem were buried under layers of dust, rubble, and mythology. It took modern archaeology to uncover the truth, to dig through the earth and find the stone toilet seats, the plastered cisterns, the stepped pools, and the parasite eggs that told the real story of how people lived and died in this extraordinary city. And here is the lesson. We look at the ancient world and think, how did they survive without all the things we have? But perhaps the better question is this: what have we lost that they had? They had community so tight that no one was ever truly alone. They had a rhythm of life that connected them to the earth, to the seasons, to each other. They had a faith so profound that they would carve tunnels through solid rock to protect their water supply and carve pools into the bedrock to purify their souls. They had no toilets, no showers, no antibiotics, and yet they built a civilization that shaped the moral and spiritual foundations of the entire Western world. They did it not in spite of their hardships, but through them. The next time you turn on a faucet and clean water pours out, think of the woman who walked down stone steps in the dark to lower a bucket into a cistern and carry it back on her shoulder. The next time you flush a toilet and everything disappears, think of the family that used ash and sand and prayer to manage what you take care of with the push of a handle. The next time you complain that the shower water is not hot enough, think of the pilgrim who immersed himself in cold rainwater collected in a rock-cut pool and considered it a blessing. We have everything they did not have, but they had something we are rapidly losing: the ability to find meaning in hardship, community in scarcity, and grace in the simple act of living one more day. Life in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago was harder than most of us can imagine, but the people who lived it were not lesser than us. In many ways, they were greater, and their story deserves to be told and remembered and honored. If you watched all the way to this point, it is because this story touched you. Leave a comment right now saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and know who truly loves the stories here on this channel. If this documentary opened your eyes to something you had never considered before, hit the like button and share this video with someone who loves history. You would be surprised how many people have never thought about how the ancient world actually worked. And if you are not yet subscribed, what are you waiting for? This channel is your gateway to the ancient world, told the way it should be told, with truth, with emotion, and with respect for the people who came before us. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us on the next journey.